Hey guys, welcome and welcome back. Tisha here, back for another chapter reading of Shattered Dreams, My Life as a Polygamous Wife. I'm going to apologize in advance if I yawn. I just realized that I forgot to read this next chapter, and this needs to be posted tomorrow, and it is late. So forgive me in advance for spreading my yawns through the screen. Go ahead and do me a favor and hit the like button as we begin. On our first trip together as a threesome, we went to visit Aunt Rhea in Hurricane. Everything was going along fairly well until Horace, a polygamous friend and lawyer in Salt Lake City, came by and gave us some alarming news. He told us the same thing Verlin told me the night in Provo, that the government authorities were gearing up to go after polygamists. But our friend knew details that Verlin didn't, and these details would very much change the immediate course of our lives. He heard from reliable sources that a raid was planned for the very next day against the polygamous settlement of Short Creek, less than 30 miles south of where we were visiting. Short Creek was where Aunt Rhea's daughters Donna and Myra lived with their husband, Clyde. For a decade, the little town of Short Creek served as a refuge for polygamists who desired to practice their lifestyle in a secluded community, uncorrupted by the worldly, secular society of the Latter-day Saints and others. It was a place where fundamentalists controlled practically everything, instead of being at the mercy of those who opposed them. This refuge had grown to house about 400 people, wow, including men, women, and swarms of children. The population varied considerably as polygamous families constantly moved in and out according to their various needs, or sometimes due to orders from above, coming to them through the colony's profit. The elders of Short Creek knew the community's practices were in flagrant violation of state and federal bigamy laws, but they'd so far escaped enforcement of those laws by keeping to themselves and by locating the town exactly on the Utah-Arizona border. This made it strategically convenient for slipping back and forth from one state to another whenever the need arose. By spreading themselves across two states, moreover, the polygamists living in Short Creek avoided being exclusively subject to either state laws. The clear responsibility of neither state. Then the Creekers had thus far been left alone by both. So because they spread themselves on the border, neither state dealt with them. That's interesting. But disturbing rumors like the ones Verlin heard recently began to circulate. Polygamists always speculated that raids like the one in 1944 and the one now planned for Short Creek were launched whenever the LDS Church and the state of Utah got particularly embarrassed about our escalating number. We were prolific, if nothing else, and our population increase did have very real and negative implications for state governments, mostly in the form of welfare costs, since polygamous husbands, like my father, were rarely able to support all their wives and children. I think I've said it in a different video for a different book. I have no problem with people getting a public assistance. I understand that sometimes there may be a need, but I do have a problem when people take advantage of that assistance. It's meant to assist you. It's not meant for you to purposely have child after child after child, knowing that you're already struggling, but you're purposely having more children, which is what this cult does. It was common for subsequent wives like my mother to draw welfare as supposed single moms while they continued to produce a child each year or so with a husband who circulated constantly from wife to wife. When I was growing up, my mother had a hiding place inside a haystack near our home for when the welfare authorities came around checking for fraud. Then there were the rampant charges of child abuse, both in the form of giant families full of neglected children and teen and preteen girls being taken as wives. Okay, so back to the hiding place. Your mom had a hiding place inside a haystack. What? So she could hide the amount of kids she had? Who went in the haystack? I don't get it. When they got word that this new raid was in the works, most of the settlers at Short Creek decided to stand firm. We feared for them terribly. All of us remember the 1944 raid that resulted in the imprisonment of my father, Uncle Rulon, and so many others. Though I only been a child of 7 at the time, I doubted I'd ever be able to forget the terror and sadness I felt when I thought they were going to take me from my mother and put me into foster care. The officials conducting the raid had in fact interrogated her, but they didn't bother her once she assured them that she left my father. The next morning, Sunday, July 26, 1953. They did it on a Sunday? The long-dreaded raid at Short Creek took place. In the wee hours just before daylight, we watched from Aunt Rhea's upstairs bedroom window as convoys of police cars and government vehicles snaked along the highway south out of Hurricane. Like a midnight funeral procession, they quietly ascended Hurricane Hill, headed for Short Creek. We lost sight of them after that. Subsequent newspaper accounts of the raid informed us that Governor Howard Pyle of Arizona, under strong public pressure to enforce the anti-polygamy laws and thereby blot out a community dedicated to the production of white slaves, this is quotes, worked for months to mobilize a number of government agencies and officials, including the FBI, the National Guard, state troopers, the Highway Patrol sheriffs, and judges, among others. Even some of Utah authorities took part in this all-out effort to correct what was variously labeled as insurrection, a conspiracy, and a monstrous and evil growth. Those are all quotes. At the appointed pre-dawn hour, they approached the little town of Short Creek from both the Arizona and Utah sides, expecting to surprise everyone. Instead, the loud boom of a dynamite explosion greeted them while they were still some distance away. To those in the convoy, of course, this could only mean trouble. To the Creekers, it was a signal from loyal lookouts telling them the raid was imminent. Because of the warning, those who wanted to hide had time to do so, but the majority of the townspeople took it as their cue to gather for final instructions on how to receive the invaders. Cautiously, the heavily armed patrols descended on Short Creek, expecting militant hostiles. They'd been warned the fundamentalist lawbreakers were desperate, as well as armed and dangerous. To their surprise, they found most of the saints gathered in front of the church, unarmed, praising God and singing, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty." The Creekers surrendered without a fight, martyrs for their faith. The real drama was caused by all the hysterical children afraid of losing their parents. During the next few days, the saints were held captive. Under strict surveillance, they were fed National Guard rotations and escorted back and forth to the outhouse. Stragglers who hid or tried to flee across state lines were gathered up, while the judges and the other officials began sorting out the preliminary fates of the various categories of perpetrators and victims they found within the settlement. These included non-polygamous adults or those who still had only one spouse, polygamous husbands, adult polygamous wives, underage polygamous wives, and 263 children, some of whom clung to their mothers, wailing in fear of being separated and carted off to foster homes. I get that they don't agree with the way things are being done, and I understand that this is a cult, but they are further traumatizing these kids sometimes by the way that they conduct these raids. Impossible decisions had to be made, and many mistakes were committed in the process. Some of the adults who were participants in plural marriages were freed to go home with their children, while some who were suspected to be polygamous but weren't remained in custody. So they were letting go of the wrong people. It was a disagreeable situation for all concerned, especially the mothers and children. Seeing their sad plight, some of the officers felt so bad they apologized and expressed sympathy. But they had their orders after all. They arrested most of the settlers as bigamists. The men and a few of the women were taken to Kingman, Arizona for incarceration, while approximately 40 women and 166 children were loaded into charter buses and transported farther south to Phoenix, where they were put into temporary shelters until their relocation could be arranged. Naturally, they all wondered if they would ever see their families reunited again. Fear struck the hearts of Mormon fundamentalists everywhere. There were an estimated 30 to 40,000 polygamists scattered across the West in Utah, Arizona, Idaho, Nevada, and other states, along with Canada and Mexico. All now felt vulnerable. Money was scarce. Supplies were short. Many families were so large that going into hiding was next to impossible. Groups of saints began moving quietly out of the big cities in the dead of night onto farms and ranches, hoping to escape persecution. They went into Montana and California for concealment. But the government's aggression did nothing to curb the fundamentalists' fervor for plural marriage. Instead, it bonded families even closer together, strengthening their will to be loyal to God and living in their revered principle. Fundamentalist leaders simply directed all their followers to lay low until the storm subsided. Members were praised for their self-control and nonviolence. Instilled with a righteous pride, they actually welcomed the persecution, vowing to advance God's cause at all cost. Women were even counseled to relinquish their children rather than their religious freedom to obey God's commandments. The Short Creek settlers who'd been jailed did their part too. Seeing themselves something like Paul in biblical times, they held prayer meetings asking for deliverance and sang praises to their Maker. Now that liberty was on the line, the fundamentalists were demonstrating that they were willing to give their all for polygamy. As for Verlin and Charlotte and me, we were so fully involved with the polygamous clans around the area, we considered ourselves to be in the same serious danger. We held a family council and decided Verlin should immediately quit school at BYU and move back to his family's ranch in Chihuahua, Mexico, taking Charlotte and her baby with him. Wow, he just quit school like that. I would join them in a month or so. Obediently, I agreed, wishing God's blessings on them as I saw them off. Somehow, on the other side of this crisis, I hoped to find stability and some freedom from all the hiding. My brother and sister-in-law let me stay with them in Salt Lake City until Verlin sent instructions and bus fare for me to come to them. When it was time, I asked Richard to take me to the bus depot. He pleaded with me not to go, assuring me my life with the LeBarons would be misery. That's another person who didn't want her to go with them. Her mom didn't want to go with them. Her brother didn't want to go with them. And now it sounds like her brother-in-law is telling her not to go. Besides, as I thought about it, I decided I was thrilled to be moving down to Mexico. What a romantic image I had conjured in my mind. It would be a wonderful adventure. Chapter 9. I was going to be met in El Paso by two of Verlin's older brothers, Joel and Florin, who were traveling in the no, sorry, in the I-85 rugged miles north by bus to the bustling Quad. Okay, I'm not going to even try to say this word. Ciudad. That's the first. Second is Juarez. Okay, just across the border. Joel registered in a cheap motel and was waiting there while Florin came to the bus station in El Paso to retrieve his young wife, Anna, and her two small children, and me. Anna had been on my bus all the way from Salt Lake City, but we pretended not to know each other until we crossed into New Mexico. It had only been a few weeks since the raid at Short Creek, so we took extra precautions just in case any of the authorities might be watching. As the bus eased into El Paso Terminal, I saw Florence standing there, scrutinizing each passenger climbing off. I met Florin a few times when he'd come to see Aunt Rhea's older daughter. I was about 10 at the time. I remembered him as pleasant, a fun-loving fellow, so I felt lucky to have him for a brother-in-law. Pushing my worn suitcase out the bus door before me, I threw myself into his arms. Anna was hugging him too. He released his hold on me, kissed her warmly, and held her for another brief moment. After loving on the kids, he waved down a taxi cab. It took us across the border into Old Mexico. Joe met us by the lobby of the Hotel Revias. He was about 6 feet tall and had a medium build and straight blonde hair. He was very congenial, his blue eyes conveying good humor as he talked. Joel reminded me so much of Verlin. I immediately liked him. After a hurried breakfast at a small cafe, we boarded a grimy bus. I took a seat at the very rear of the dilapidated old vehicle next to Joel. Nearby, Anna and Florin were cuddling and catching up after a 9-month separation. She was his only wife so far, but they had marital troubles while living in the States where they met. She left him and he'd gone home to Mexico. The needs of the children motivated her attempt to reconcile. I feared my clean dress would be soiled on the filthy, torn canvas seats, but I kept quiet about it. The large, rusty screws holding down the seats were almost vibrating out of the floor. The driver was trying to force the old bus into third gear, but it wouldn't or couldn't switch. He pumped the clutch like mad, grinding the gears, but still he couldn't seem to gain a momentum. We bounced along ever so slowly. The alien landscape of the sand and mesquites barely crawled past as we headed south along the dangerously narrow, potholed highway. It seemed as if we spent more time letting people on and off the bus than we did actually traveling. At the first stop, a weather-worn Mexican gentleman, who I figured was about 70, boarded the bus. He was wearing crumpled white cotton trousers and a long-sleeve white shirt. What I noticed most was the wide red sash tied around his ample stomach. Since all the seats were taken, he stood with his back to us, clinging with one hand onto the luggage rack above as the bus bounced along. As more and more people got on, he was forced to back up until he was standing directly in front of me. When he finally turned around, to my utter amazement, I found myself face to face with 2 live roosters tied by their legs to his big red sash. They looked as embarrassed about the whole thing as I was. But the old man never cracked a smile. Next, a round-faced, Indian-looking woman with long black braid down her back got on the bus. She disrespectfully shoved everyone out of her way, squeezing herself onto the already overcrowded seat next to me. With her bare feet, she held a squealing little pig under her seat. I'd never seen anything like it. So these people are carrying animals on this bus that is rickety, that got screws coming out the seat and can't get past third gear. Interesting. In an effort not to gawk at the strange characters all around me, I asked Joel to translate the Spanish words I saw on two bold signs posted at the front of the bus. Oh, y'all, Spanish ain't my thing. Ain't been my thing since I was in high school. No brinque en los asientos, he said, trying to hide a smile. It means don't jump on the seats. I gasped. What kind of place is this? Joel laughed. The other one says, no, no escupe en el piso. That means don't spit on the floor. Okay. Before I could stop myself, I blurted out, in the States, they would junk this bus. Why do they even allow this old heap on the road? Well, it's because we're going second class, Joel chuckled. Second class, I exclaimed in disbelief. Why are we going second class? Girl, because you're not even supposed to be there. What? Irene, come on, Irene. I need you to lose a little bit of your brain there, hun. You're not supposed to be there. Because there's no third. He answered straight faced. Just then, Florine got my attention. Hey, look, quick. He pointed to a crude adobe, mud brick house with a flat dirt roof. That's exactly like the house you're going to live in. I laughed out loud. You and Joel sure have a good sense of humor. I can see I'm going to survive in Mexico after all. She's sitting there laughing, but they're serious probably. That house might even be better than what she's going to, but we'll see. 2 hours later, we got off the bus at a completely isolated junction called Cueco, Cueco. Other than the road, I saw nothing in any direction except sagebrush and mesquite bushes. The crumbling asphalt pavement ended 30 feet or so away, where a dirt road took over, winding off to the west toward a range of mountains. The hot August sun beat down unmercifully. Neither Florin nor Joel seemed to mind it in the least. The brothers were too involved, batting at one another with paddle balls, small red balls attached to paddles by rubber cords. Soon, the balls at the end of their cords got all tangled up, so Anna demanded that they put them away before they ruined it for the kids. Joel pretended he didn't hear her as he whacked Florin on the head. They both giggled like little boys. Anna and I sat on our dusty suitcases, wondering why it was taking so long for the next bus to come by. 2 hours passed. I was anxious to get to my new home. Finally, I asked Joel when the next bus was due. He never cracked a smile. Tomorrow morning at 9, he said. Don't tease me, Joel. I want to get to the ranch. Really, the next bus won't come until the morning, but we'll hitch a ride on the first truck headed in our direction. One by one, cars came and went along the highway, but none of them turned toward our dirt road. The boiling sun kept beating down, and I perspired heavily. Finally, Joel saw a gray Dodge pickup approaching. Recognizing it, he held it down when it turned our way. The driver agreed to give us all a ride, so Joel and Florin shouted for Anna, the kids, and me to get into the cab of the truck. Laughing, they threw our suitcases into the back and jumped in behind them. They seemed to be having a grand old time. I sat next to the driver, feeling very nervous, a well-to-do Mexican decked out in Western attire. Since he spoke no English and I spoke no Spanish, we rode in awkward silence. At least it was awkward for me. An hour crawled by while choking. Hot dust whirled in through the open windows. At one point, Anna and I turned to look at each other, and we both burst into hysterical laughter. We were so covered with white dust, we looked like we had on powdered wigs and white mascara. The driver stared at us like we'd taken leave of our senses, but he never said a word. We finally came to a little town that we learned was called El Valle, the Valley, officially known as San Oh, good. Y'all, these Spanish words gonna kill me. San Buenaventura, Buenaventura. It was a typical small town founded by ranchers and farmers, not much more than a wide place in the road where a few small buildings and adobe houses had been thrown up. The driver slammed on his brakes and we skipped to the left, coming to a precious stop in front of a moss green colored store facing the roadway. Joe hopped out of the truck and rattled away in Spanish to the driver, who eventually yielded to his request. What luck! Joe had talked him into going an hour out of his way to take us on the ranch some dozen miles further. The closer we got, the greater my anticipation at finally getting to see the beautiful ranch that would be my new home. She keeps saying beautiful, but with what she's describing here and the way that these people just up and left and went to this place, we know it's not going to be beautiful. She really didn't know. I fully expected the earthness and poverty and oddity I've seen of Mexico so far to all simply disappear at the LeBaron's gate. Exactly. My apprehensions had only to do with seeing Verlin and Charlotte again. Verlin, because he was the husband I still barely knew, and Charlotte, well, for obvious reasons. Half an hour later, with no warning, the truck lurched off the dirt road through large mesquites, bouncing over what seemed to be no more than a cow trail and scattering chickens in its wake. Joel and Florence stood up in the bed of the truck, hollering and waving their arms. Welcome home, ladies. Welcome home. Excitedly, I challenged Anna. Let's see who spots the ranch house first. She really don't know, y'all. Oh, poor girl. We both leaned forward, peering through the powdery windshield. The truck slowly came to a halt in front of a large corral. Verlin and his brother, Ervil, were milking cows when they heard the truck approaching. They stopped and jumped over the corral fence in their excitement to greet us. Verlin ran past Ervil, yanked open the truck door, and greeted Anna warmly. Reaching out his long arms, he helped me down next, laughing when he saw his dust-covered young bride. As he gave me a little hug, he whispered in my ear, Nobody in here knows we're married except Joel and Florin. Remember, you're just my sister-in-law. So she just went through all of this traveling with Dust and all this other stuff where you all were supposedly supposed to be able to live out your lives like a married couple, and you're surrounded by polygamists, just to be told nobody knows we're together, so you still got to act like you're just my sister-in-law. Sounds to me like she would have been better off staying where she was. I could not have been more crushed. I come over 1,000 miles, the last 100 on washboard dirt roads to escape this very thing. Verlin said we'd be free here to live our fundamentalist religion and be family. I felt broadsided and minimized by this unexpected demand for further secrecy. Just when I expected to finally be validated, from the time being, I couldn't even question him about it. I had to play along for the time being. So she was tricked. Verlin tapped my suitcase against the rocky path to shake loose some of the dust and said, Come on, Irene, let's walk home. I followed him, still looking for the ranch house. As we walked along the dirt path, I told Verlin how worn out and how dirty I felt from the long trip. All I wanted was a nice warm shower and a clean bed. That's when I began to wonder just where my bed might be now that I'd been labeled a mere sister-in-law. It had been almost 5 weeks since I'd slept with Verlin. Would we sleep together here if no one was supposed to know I was married to him? And what about Charlotte? Would I have to pretend to be a guest in her home? I had just assumed all this time I would have my own private quarters in the LeBaron's ranch house. We only got a few yards when Verlin stopped at a small house exactly like the one Florin pointed out on the way down. It had a flat dirt roof with uneven wooden frames for windows and gunny sacks rolled up at the top of the frames to keep out dust and cold. I stood in front of it with my mouth hanging open, dimly aware that Verlin was speaking to me. I was turning to face him when I heard him drop my suitcase on the ground. Somewhat sheepishly, he said, "Welcome to the ranch, Irene. This is your new home." Ranch? He called this a ranch? My cheeks flushed with sudden anger. Anyone with any brains at all knows that a ranch has a nice framed white cottage with a neat picket fence with a large red barn. There had to be some rational explanation for all of this. Verlin was surely kidding me, like his brothers had all the way here. But the look on his face told me it was no joke. Somehow, I kept my cool and held back the gathering tears. With monumental restraint, I managed to say, "I just want to take a shower, Verlin. Would you please show me to the bathroom?" Wait, right here," he said. He dashed into the house and returned with a bar of coarse homemade soup, a washcloth, and a raggedy towel. Oh boy. Thrusting the soap into my hands, he raised the handle of the solid cast iron pump next to the house and chirped, "We don't have electricity, of course, but look here, we do have running water." As he spoke, he forced a steady stream of water from the well with the strong pumping motion of his long arm. Ignoring this new revelation for the time being, I unbraided my thick, dusty blonde hair and held my head under the pump, gasping for breath as the cold water washed the dirt down the wooden trough. I rinsed the cake dust and grime off my arms and legs as best as I could, standing first on one foot, then on the other. After that, I scrubbed my filthy feet, wrapped my hair into a towel turban, and flipped my head back and followed Verlin into the house. Things just went downhill from there. As Verlin pushed the crude heavy front door open, it scraped the cement floor with a harsh, grating sound. The first thing I noticed in the gloom was a wobbly wooden table in the center of the room. The only thing on it was a kerosene lamp. Lord, she gone camping in the house. This is horrible. A pale yellow enameled cooking stove with a rusty stovepipe protruding through the unfinished wood beam ceiling squatted in the far corner. In another corner, a sack of unpainted orange crates were arranged into some semblance of shelving for cups and dishes. A galvanized 5-gallon bucket filled with well water stood next to a rough-hewn wooden washstand masquerading as a kitchen sink. A long crooked counter of sorts stretched across one wall, its shelving partially covered with a piece of cloth. I saw no food anywhere on these shelves, just a few mismatched canisters. There was no refrigerator in the room or other appliances of any kind. Y'all don't have any electricity. So oh goodness. There were no knickknacks or pictures on the walls, no clock, no linoleum or a rug on the floor. Nothing that might help turn this simple shelter into a house. Through the kitchen window, I could see a small wooden outhouse set some 40 feet behind the house at the end of the dirt path. Here it was, 1953. How could people still be living like this? Immediately, I prayed, "Oh Lord, how long before I can get back to civilization?" Charlotte appeared from one of the 2 bedrooms adjoining the primitive kitchen on the opposite sides as she welcomed me with a hug, asking if I was hungry after my long trip. 10 minutes earlier, I'd been starving, but now I had no appetite at all. "No thanks," I answered. "I just need to brush out my hair." I didn't dare mention bed to her. I felt so disappointed and out of place. Once again, nothing but an intruder in my husband's home. Miserable. I didn't know where to turn. By now, it was dark. Verlin lit the lamp on the table. He opened the door to the second bedroom with his foot. I couldn't help notice that the hinges on the door were made from old tire treads. What? This is terrible. What? Old tire treads simply nailed to the door frame. Motioning me inside, he placed the dim oil lamp on a white wooden chair next to the bed. He borrowed a clean sheet from Charlotte to cover us for the night. Before we lay down, he threw a hand-woven blanket over the bare mesh metal springs. "Where's the mattress?" I asked. "Oh, these bed springs are woven," he said. "With this blanket over them, you'll never know the difference." Kissing my cheek, he added, "I'll be right back. I want to go tell Charlotte good night." I assumed he just wanted to see if she was already in bed before he blew out the lamp. I slipped into my long nightgown, thinking how Charlotte made it, especially for me, and allowed me to marry her husband. Despite all the gospel teachings I received on one being a faithful, compliant, plural wife, a sudden surge of jealousy and resentment overwhelmed me. How could I have any privacy with nothing but a kitchen separating Charlotte and me? I was willing to share a husband, but I would not share a house. Tomorrow I would stomp my foot on the lousy cement floor and inform Verlin I wouldn't be spending another night under her roof. Girl, you don't sound like you're going to have a roof at all unless you stay there, because she barely has a roof. Grudgingly, I climbed into the rickety bed. The rough weave of the wool blanket scratched me as I lay there waiting for my husband to return. I looked around in the dim light at the bare, empty room. Its walls weren't painted or even plastered. It had no pictures, no closet, not even a dresser in which to unpack my meager belongings. Verlin finally came back in carrying a white enamel chamber pot in his hand. He blushed as he said, "This will be under the bed if you need it." Oh, goodness. It's going back to what happened when she was a little girl. It had only been a few weeks since I'd been too bashful to use the toilet with a door separating us. I told myself I'd bust before I used that thing in the same room with him. I was so embarrassed I couldn't speak. He bolted the back door that opened onto the bedroom. Crossing the room, he pushed another wooden bar into place, locking the door that went into the kitchen. "For privacy," he said. Checking to see that his matches were handy for later, he cupped his hands above the lamp glass chimney and blew out the dancing flame. I lay there in anticipation, waiting for my husband to get into bed and take me into his strong arms. In the darkness, Verlin peeled off his worn work clothes and put a pair of pajamas on over the thin cotton undergarments he received in the LDS temple a few years earlier before he began his life in polygamy. This white one-piece knit bodysuit resembled a pair of long johns, only it had no buttons. It simply tied close across the front with 3 strings. It covered Verlin from his neck to his wrists and ankles. Only Mormons in good standing could receive those holy garments, which were ceremonially awarded with a promise of protection and an explanation of their symbolic meaning. Except for Verlin to bathe, the garments never came off, not even during intimacy. That's where the ties in the front came in. So whenever they had relations, he still always had on clothes? I know that they talked about the garments, but that's not what I was picturing. Huh. Verlin snuggled up to me and cooed in my ear. "You can keep these pajamas of mine in your room from now on." in your room. They're living together. I've got another pair in Charlotte's bedroom. He could say the most devastating things without even realizing it. After asking about my trip and my family, he got busy trying to convince me he hadn't actually lied to me about the ranch. He merely failed to tell me everything. I would eventually learn this was Verlin's usual method of conflict resolution. He did what he wanted, and then he charmed the pants off whoever was unhappy about it. Irene, you must be very cautious from now on, he told me next. You have 2 Mexican sister-in-laws, Luis and Delfina. They may not treat you right if they find out you're actually my wife. We won't lie to them. We just won't tell them the whole truth. After all, you are my sister-in-law. You see, neither of them have the spirit of the gospel like you do. We won't tell them until we have to. Why are y'all there? This makes no sense to me. I later found out that those 2 wives were actually Catholic, and they had no desire to be plural wives or have polygamy thrown in their faces. But I didn't care about any of that now. I just wanted to be loved. I hadn't traveled all the way to a foreign country to be lectured. I wanted to be held and kissed, to be assured of my husband's love. But Verlin made no loving advances. As he talked, he kept his hand on my stomach, making damn sure not to touch my breast. Then he raised up over me and gave me a light peck on the lips and yawned. Good night, Irene, he murmured. I'm so lucky to have you for a wife. The smoldering volcano inside of me suddenly erupted. Your wife? I yelled. You're treating me more like a concubine. Shh. He tried to silence me. Please, Charlotte will hear us. Where do I fit in, Verlin? Where are my rights? I fought to remove the hand with which he now covered my mouth. No, you won't shut me up. You won't. I didn't run off and leave my family to come down here to the end of the earth so that you could roll over and not even make love to me. Shh, shh, he begged almost desperately. Hold still, please. You're shaking the spring. She'll think I'm making love to you. I pulled away crying. Please don't cry, Irene. She'll see your swollen face tomorrow morning thinking I'm mistreating you. I don't care what she thinks. I'm sick and tired of being second fiddle, I wailed. Irene, he whispered, trying to calm me. Why would you ever say you're second fiddle? I sat up, gritting my teeth, and snapped. Because you fiddle with me second. I could feel his despair. How would he ever handle 2 wives in the same house? Finally, calming me, he persuaded me to lie back down next to him. He kissed me repeatedly, trying to dry my tears on his pajama sleeves. Forgive me if I don't make love to you, he said. Try to understand. I don't want to hurt Charlotte. But look, since we've been apart so long, I'll give you 2 nights in a row. What do you think about that? So already, their marriage is going to be different. Because he don't want to hurt Charlotte, but he's hurting her because she's needing to have him. And he's not willing to be with her. This is a mess, y'all, already. Big deal was what I thought. The tears welled back up. Would we ever make love again for fear of hurting Charlotte? Could that really be how plural marriage was supposed to work? Surely not. If I was supposed to manufacture a child each year, the knot in my stomach got bigger and tighter. I couldn't help but think of how different things would be if this were Glenn lying next to me. Verlin held me as he abruptly began praying. I tried to cry softly so as to not interrupt. Thank you, Lord, for Irene's safe arrival, he said. Give us strength to bear up under our trials and tribulations. Let Irene know she is needed and loved. With a final amen, he pulled me closer. I do love you, he whispered in my ear as he drifted off. Apparently, content that God had answered his prayer, within a few minutes, Verlin's rhythm breathing told me he was sound asleep. I lay there wide awake, staring into nothingness, exhausted from the day's shattering events. Soon, I heard tiny squeaks, then odd rushing noises. I listened for a while, but couldn't figure out what this could be. So I shook Verlin awake. What are those noises? I asked nervously. What noises? He said groggily. We both listened. They came again. "Oh, that," he said, patting my arm as he rolled over towards the wall. "You'll get used to it. It's just mice running up the walls." What? Burying my face in the pillow, I turned my back to him and wondered how long it would be before I was climbing the wall. The bad thing about expectations is the huge thud that always seems to follow on their heels. I'd envisioned an idyllic Utah-like hacienda where I'd have my own home far from Charlotte and live openly and proudly as Verlin's wife. The reality so far was much more akin to what Mother and Richard predicted. This thud left me in a deep state of shock. If not for the promise I made to Uncle Rulon and the fact that I knew not one word of Spanish, I think I would have resolved in that moment to thumb my way right back to El Paso the next day. So far, I live up to my side of this most difficult bargain. But for some reason, God wasn't doing his part. And that is the end of those 2 chapters. You guys, this is the way to end it for the weekend because this is crazy. This book is going to really have us thinking, because there is no way on earth that I would be okay with you tricking me to come to what I thought was paradise just to be laying in the bed and having to listen to mice running up and down the walls while I hope a spring doesn't poke me. But you guys, let me know what you think. Have a great weekend. Until next time.